Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Thai Spice Sweet Tea. That's right, I am very excited to be sharing this lighter, less sweet, and I think more refreshing take on Thai-style iced tea. And if there's a better cold beverage to serve with spicy food, besides beer, I don't know what that would be. And to get started, we will add some nice cold fresh water to a saucepan, which for me is only going to be about 4 cups. Since I already know I'll basically chug everything I make, since that's how addictive this is. So be careful. And then before we make tea, we're going to infuse this water with some aromatic spices and other exotic ingredients, including a few cardamom pods, which I feel like we should smash up a little bit before we add them, just to help activate and release all the flavor. And then besides some cardamom, we'll also toss in some whole star anise, as well as a few whole cloves. And then we'll follow that with a little pinch of cinnamon, which could and probably should be a cinnamon stick. But I don't like a strong cinnamon flavor in this. So for me, a little touch of the ground works best. And at this point, I'm going to add my one and only secret ingredient, which is a little bit of tamarind paste. Right, when I first started playing around with this, I noticed some people using tamarind seeds, which I didn't have. So I added some of the paste and really loved it. And that's been my method ever since. And then what we'll do is set our heat to medium-high, and we'll wait for this to come to a simmer. And while we do, we can give it a stir, which is probably completely unnecessary. But you know my philosophy. Stirring is relaxing and therapeutic. But anyway, whether you stir or not, once it starts to simmer, we will reduce our heat down to low, and we will let this simmer for about 5 minutes or so. And we could go a little longer if we wanted to, although we don't want this water to reduce. So if you did let this go longer for a stronger flavor, you might need to add a little splash of water back in. And once this fragrant potion has simmered down low for about 5 minutes, we are ready to add our tea, which for me is going to be 5 bags of red rooibos tea, which is my personal favorite. Plus I'm also going to add 2 bags of regular black tea for a little more oomph and a little bit of a more intense flavor. And some people use only black tea for this. And then they'll sneak in a few drops of red food coloring. But if you use the red rooibos, not only will this taste delicious, but you don't have to do that. And then what we'll do besides giving it a stir is wait a couple minutes for this to come back to a simmer, at which point we're just going to turn off the heat. And then what we'll do is set our timer for 5 minutes, and we will let those tea bags steep. Although I should mention, some people go longer and some people go shorter. So you might have to experiment with the times to dial in your perfect brew. So maybe do it like me this first time and then adjust from there. And then what we'll do once our timer rings is add the last ingredient, which is going to be a little touch of sugar, and we will stir that in and let it sit for another 5 minutes. At which point that sugar should be fully dissolved in that still pretty hot liquid. And I'm going to go over this later, but the versions I grew up drinking in San Francisco were actually made with unsweetened tea. And then it was always topped with sweetened condensed milk, which once stirred in made for a very sweet drink. But as you'll see, I like to use the opposite approach, where we sweeten the tea and then use an unsweetened topping. And we'll get to that in a minute. But at this point, once our sugar is dissolved, we'll go ahead and strain this, and we'll let it sit draining for a few minutes. At which point we should grab a spoon or a spatula and squeeze out every single bit of that liquid we can. Oh yeah, those tea bags are trying to hold on to the best stuff. And that's it. Once I had that strained into a bowl, I went ahead and transferred it into this pourable measuring cup, which we could have just strained directly into had I thought of it. But it's fine as long as I can transfer it in without spilling even a drop. But if you do drip a little, don't worry. That's considered very good luck, allegedly. And once our tea's been strained and in whatever container we're going to serve it out of, we've come to the most difficult part of this whole recipe, waiting for this to be chilled before we drink it. So what we need to do is wrap this up and pop it in the fridge until it's ice cold. Otherwise it's going to melt the ice cubes and everything's going to get watered down, which would be disappointing and very regrettable. So I did chill mine thoroughly before filling a nice tall glass all the way to the top with ice. And we'll take our now fully chilled tea and pour it slowly over the top. At which point this is ready to top with something creamy and delicious, which as I mentioned traditionally is sweetened condensed milk. But since the tea's been sweetened, my favorite topping for this is just plain coconut milk. which is definitely lighter and way, way less sweet. Oh, and if the coconut milk you buy looks separated when you open it, just simply toss it in a blender and blend it until it's smooth, and it should look exactly like this. But anyway, once I had my sweet tea coconut milked, I inserted a straw and finished up with a little garnish of a whole star anise. And by the way, I chose a paper straw, a decision I regretted almost immediately, since what we need to do before we drink this is push that straw down all the way around, mixing in about half of our topping into the tea before we start drinking. And I like saving the earth as much as the next guy, but that paper straw was no match for these ice cubes. So this was a little bit challenging, but I did get it done. At which point I picked this up and took a big sip of one of my favorite cold drinks of all time. And I think by sweetening the tea instead of the topping, we have a little more control over the sweetness level. Plus, besides being creamy and delicious, I think the flavor of the coconut milk works so well with all these other ingredients. I mean, obviously, if you're a fan of Thai food, you've seen coconut milk used in all kinds of things. So it really does pair beautifully with this ingredient list. And coconut milk really isn't something I describe as light. But in comparison to that thick, syrupy, sweetened condensed milk, I do think it's lighter and makes for a much more refreshing drink. But having said that, if you want to try it with the unsweetened tea, and then the sweetened condensed milk on the top, which is how we're supposed to do it, feel free. I mean, you are, after all, the Keystone Cop of how to top. Oh yeah, sometimes I like to do a rhyme that only people older than me will get. But fair warning, my friends, no matter what you use to top this, or exactly what spices you used, or how long you let it brew, there's one thing that every Thai-style iced tea has in common. It goes way, way too fast. And as I mentioned earlier, this is why I don't make a gallon, because I would drink a gallon. And when you get to the end, you will be overcome with a profound sense of sadness that your tea is gone. In fact, let's all listen to one of the saddest sounds ever recorded. Oh yeah, it's gone. So you know what, I'm just going to have to make another one. But anyway, other than that, this is an absolutely perfect beverage, developed and designed specifically to go with very, very spicy foods. But no matter what you enjoy this with, this easy-to-make version is lighter and less sweet and extremely refreshing. And I really do hope you give it a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.